Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight, a show designed to highlight diverse perspectives, next-generation initiatives, emerging trends, and innovative thinkers in the international higher education community. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts, Director of Partner Marketing at Podium Education. When it comes to professional development, training, thought leadership, and information sharing in international higher education, it seems every organization has dipped their toes into the proverbial workshops, events, and networking waters. And now, with the rise of digital learning and remote networking since the pandemic, it begs the question, what is the role of the modern day membership and professional development organization in our field? And that's exactly what I'm talking about in today's episode with Melissa Torres. Melissa joined the Forum on Education Abroad as president and CEO in 2019 and has over 2 decades of experience in higher education and program design, development, and implementation. She previously served as vice president for academic programs at IES Abroad, where she supervised 36 international student study abroad centers in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. She's worked with faculty and administrators across the globe, and her campus-based experience includes leading a variety of international initiatives for 3 institutions, including Brown University, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and The Ohio State University. She holds a BA in International Studies from Stonehill College and a master's degree in global education from The Ohio State University. So I'm really excited to share this interview with Melissa, but before we dive into that, I want to thank today's sponsor. Thank you to today's sponsor, World Travel Protection. Now, it's nearly impossible to have a robust team of medical, security, risk, and logistic experts in-house at any organization, which can be overwhelming for senior international officers and administrators who are likely spread way too thin and potentially underqualified to address the complexity of global risk management and security. That's why World Travel Protection believes every traveler and travel manager deserves peace of mind that assistance is always on standby. That's why they provide higher education institutions with access to a comprehensive medical, security, and operational team without the actual heavy cost of employing them all in-house. With over 30 years in the travel risk management business, World Travel Protection, or WTP, is dedicated to providing expert medical, travel, and security assistance for travelers before, during, and after they travel. WTP stays ahead of potential risks affecting their travelers by conducting important medical or security risk analysis and reporting on a daily basis. As a result of their team's experience, plus their preventative medical approach to travel assistance and best-in-class medical personnel, they are trusted to provide millions of travelers with 24/7 medical assistance each year. You can learn all about the services and resources offered by World Travel Protection by going to worldtravelprotection.com and let them know that the Gateway Spotlight sent you over. Let's go to the show. Hello, Melissa. Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight. I'm so happy you were able to join me today.
Hi, Brooke. Thank you so much for asking me. It's really a pleasure to talk with you.
I was really excited to bring you on the show to kind of spotlight and have a conversation around sort of how international education has changed, especially over the last few years as a result of the pandemic, but also as a result of higher education kind of morphing and changing as well. And then how the role of our professional organizations are also maybe changing, and what we as professionals should expect from them, what you're hoping to see moving forward, and how maybe your relationship and role is changing in the field. And so I'm ready to talk all about those great things and get sort of an insider view of what's going on at the forum. But let's start and talk about you and your international education journey and how you found yourself as the president of the Forum on Education Abroad.
I sometimes it's hard for me to believe that I still have this job. It's really the job of a lifetime. I feel incredibly privileged to be part of the forum and to have been leading it through this incredible challenge for the entire field. I think for me, my story goes all the way back to being the granddaughter of an immigrant. My paternal grandfather came to the U.S. at the age of 7 from the Azores, and on my mom's side, it's all made up of Irish immigrants. So culture and language have always fascinated me, from a really young age. And as a first gen college student, I pursued those interests, and I'll admit, my dad, who was an auto mechanic, was not particularly enthusiastic about international studies and global education as majors, but they really turned out to be the kind of the perfect starting point for what for me has been a really fulfilling career.
Mhm.
I worked at on 3 campuses and 2 Ed Abroad organizations before I came to the forum, and I think that combination of experiences really gives me insight into a large number of our members, and what the challenges are, what the needs are, what the realities are. I've worked for very small organizations. I've worked for very large institutions, and and our members come from all those walks of life, and many more. So I think having had that experience combined with managing budgets and personnel was really helpful. I had served as the chair of the forum's Outcome Assessment and Research Committee, so I was very familiar with the organization. And I just feel, even today, 3.5 years later, sometimes I have to pinch myself that I get to be in this position and I get to interact with so many interesting and dedicated people.
I love that. So I want to dig deeper a little bit into your story. So, you talked about your familial sort of exposure to international perspectives, perhaps. But like, talk to me a little bit about your first kind of true international experience outside of maybe your family dynamic.
Mhm,
Where did
mhm.
you go? How old were you? What was that big bright eyed moment of like, wow, this is a thing? I'd love to hear more about that story.
So my very first trip abroad was to Mexico City, actually, and I didn't get to study abroad as an undergraduate student because our family frankly couldn't afford it, and I didn't know enough. Again, as a first gen, I didn't have the resources that I hope our students have more access to now. Um, and I actually remember seeing a card in my advisor's office that was for a study abroad program in Ireland. And my eyes just lit up and I was like, wow, you can actually study in another country. It was such a foreign concept to me. So the first time I went abroad was actually as an adult. I was in my early 20s, and I had met a woman from Mexico. I was working at a program in Boston that trained doctors and health officials in management skills. And so she invited me to visit her family in Mexico City. And I remember the plane touching down, and it was the most odd sensation of feeling like, oh, I'm home. And why would you feel that in a place you've never been? And I think what really resonated with me was that feeling of curiosity and exploration and something new, and having I guess enough confidence in myself and the people I was interacting with to presume positive intent on everyone's side. And it kind of kicked off a whole new world for me, and in thinking about my career and what I wanted to do.
Mhm. Well, what a beautiful way to experience a new environment, a new culture by having that insider experience of like interacting with a real family and kind of
Yes,
just seeing their normal life. Because I
exactly.
know like sometimes even as international educators, if we could go to conferences and we might do, familiarization visits and site visits, but we're really just kind of seeing kind of the outer rim of the experience
Yes,
and the culture
yes.
sometimes. And what a beautiful way to get to dive in
I mean,
as your first experience.
it was, yeah, and to stand alongside someone as they're preparing a meal, or seeing what their daily schedule is like, the challenges that her son was having in school. I mean, this is going back a long time ago, but
Mhm.
You know, those experiences I think are exactly the types of authentic relationships that we want students to build. And
Hmm.
it gave me such insight into the culture and how different things were from what I was accustomed to at home.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. My favorite thing about when I'm, like, interacting with people in their sort of home environments is, like, hearing the debates they're having, around the dinner table, if you will. It's like whatever, it's like it might be the football team or, the local mayor's decision about trash cans. I don't know, like, whatever the
Yes.
thing is that's mission critical to them at the moment, but I just always think that's, like, one of my best thing is, like, what are they debating about around this table? But thank you for sharing that. I would love to switch gears a little bit. Let's like move and start focusing on the forum and this broader conversation. I'd love to hear a little bit about um, I think this is a part of our field that nobody really gets to talk about. So I just want to spend a couple minutes of like learning about what does the recruitment process look like for a professional organization, a membership organization in our field, because I one, there's not that many of them, and two, their role in our field is so specific and so broad at the same time that, I would love to hear like what does it feel like or what's the experience like being recruited and interviewed for a president level role at a very respected organization like this. I mean, had big shoes to fill. What, Brian Whalen was just before you, right? And the founding president, I believe. So give us a little insight of like what that experience was like for you. Was it nerve wracking? Was it enjoyable? I love to hear it.
It was incredibly nerve-wracking at the start. I did what I think a lot of women leaders do, which is I counted myself out.
Mm,
I knew about the position. I had read the position description, and I enumerated all these reasons in my mind why a selection committee would never choose me.
mm,
And it was actually a colleague of mine, or a former colleague of mine at the time, who had suggested to the search committee that they reach out to me. So when I learned that he'd done that, I told him, I like, you're crazy. Like, they're never going to hire me. And and then I had a contact from the search firm. We had a great conversation. I expressed some of my reservations, which were all about um, things where I saw gaps. And he was very encouraging. And at the end of the conversation, I thought, well, I really have nothing to lose by applying, right? It's a little bit of time, it's a little bit of soul searching, but I have nothing to lose by applying. And from the very first conversation with the members of the search committee, who were members of the forum's board of directors, the forum council, there was a member at large. It was very clear to me that the goal was to find the person who, yes, had the right combination of experience and skills, but it was the person who was going to have the vision and the energy and the drive, I guess, to move the organization forward. I have
mhm,
had the incredible good fortune to build on a very strong foundation, an association that's incredibly well respected. And so from the minute that I met them, I began to relax, and I was able to just be myself. And I think that's the best possible feeling when you're in an interview situation, to sit back and say, okay, if I can just be myself and I can talk about the things that are important to me, and if I were in this role, here's what I would like to do, instead of trying to make it a performance. um and then it's not authentic, it's not real, and they're not getting what they bargained for, and you're not getting what you really need and want.
mhm,
So it was a very comfortable process. And I say comfortable in that the search committee was just generous with time. The search firm kept me informed. I think in any job search, it's the waiting that's so
yeah,
hard.
yeah,
the person who's doing who's the candidate, I think like that's the number one thing in on their mind. And for a search committee, it might be one of 85 things that they're thinking about today.
Right.
So,
Right.
and so the forum also moved much more quickly.
Yeah.
Whenever I've been hired at a university, it's been a
Oh,
9-month process.
oh yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and, and so I applied, I don't remember the exact time frame, but I think I applied in September, and I was hired sometime in November.
Yeah, I when I was looking at doing some research on you for this interview, I did see that the announcement, I think it went out like late November. So yeah, that was a really fast turnaround. And I love that you brought up one, this idea of women especially discounting themselves for roles that they just feel like, "Ah, I could kill that, but yet maybe I couldn't." I have all those gaps, and I think we all know the stats about how women, if they don't meet like 99% of the job,
Right.
recommendations or requirements, that they'll just say never mind. Whereas men might meet 50%. I don't know the exact stats there, but it's much less. And they'll still put themselves in the ring for that. And I love that you brought that up, because I think, especially for women listening, especially for women who are coming up in our field, and who want to go for that director job or that VP job or what have you, is that know have some confidence in your experience. You have something to bring to the table, and if anything, it'll be a wonderful learning process to learn about what are your core values and beliefs, and how do you want to move the needle in organizations that you're interested in. And I also love that you talked about how you could be yourself. I think that is like an under talked about and less, not appreciated component of any career track, but especially in our international ed. It's so personal to most of us. We all have those experiences, and our passion really brought us to this field. And like not being able to bring your whole self to your role and to the organization and I think, and now more than ever, I think people are really thinking about that of like, I'm not one thing, I'm not a monolith. I mean, I think thinking about what's happening to the prime minister of Finland right now. Is it Finland? Yeah. And it's how she has to be, is expected to be compartmentalized in who she is.
Yeah.
But we're whole people. And so I love that they gave you that comfort level and that space to sort of be fully Melissa in the process. That's really
Yeah,
beautiful.
they did. And I think the other thing that's really, if I have lessons to share, I think that network that you develop throughout your career and the people that you interact with, um, that has been the most valuable asset for me, both personally, of course, in the relationships, but also professionally.
Hmm.
In many ways, that network is incredibly, incredibly important.
Hmm.
And then just being a little bit brave and being willing to say, well, I'll look at a job in another city or another state, or I'll look at something that's maybe not as well defined or isn't exactly what I've done before.
Hmm.
And that takes a certain amount of courage. And I guess the older I get, the more I feel like those decisions and leaps of faith have paid off.
Hmm.
But when you're starting out in your career, I think it can be really challenging to take that first jump.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great advice. So let's talk about the forum and the role of membership organizations. In your bio, as it was talked about at the beginning of this episode, you had about a year on the book, so to speak, of being the president of Forum. And then, of course, the pandemic hits. And all of our worlds are rocked in multiple ways, and really disrupted our field and brought it to a grinding halt. And I would love to hear a little bit about how, because I've talked to providers who've experienced that. I've talked to people at institutions and what their experience was with the pandemic. But I haven't really heard like how it impacted a professional organization, and what you all were dealing with, especially because in a lot of ways you serve the field and serve professionals, yet I'm sure like your bottom line was hit, and other elements that keep the lights on were also probably impacted. So talk us through what was going on at the forum, especially in those early days of the pandemic.
Well, it's a little ironic actually, because back in 2019, I had wanted the field to start paying more attention to sustainability.
Mm.
And so in the summer of 2019, with the conference committee for our March 2020 conference, we chose the theme of education abroad at a crossroads, action for a sustainable future.
Mm-hmm.
And, we did an incredible amount of work to reduce the environmental impact of that 2020 conference. And little did we know that we'd have a much smaller carbon footprint than we ever could have imagined.
Right.
Because the conference would end up being the very first virtual conference in the entire field.
Mm-hmm.
So, I am exceptionally proud of how we have responded to members' needs throughout the pandemic. I think it's never been more important to have a vocal advocate for education abroad. We were the very first association to respond. I don't know if you remember back in March 2020, but the CDC issued a letter advising schools to bring all their study abroad students home. And you could still get on a plane and go to a business meeting or get on a cruise ship and go on vacation, but study abroad students were supposed to be repatriated. So within a week or so of that announcement being made, we had reached out to the CDC. We had 33 co-signers on that letter, reminding them that we have standards in this field and we have an incredible amount of support for students who are traveling abroad to study or to intern. And excuse me. And so that was kind of our initial reaction. Mm-hmm. Really, as soon as the pandemic hit, I did numerous interviews with members of the media, and some of them were completely ready to write off study abroad and international internships. Oh,
and what do you mean by that? Like, what were they writing off specifically?
I think that when classes went online and virtual classes became a thing and virtual internships became available. And I have to hand it to my colleagues who do internships. Like everyone talks about pivoting, but the first thing that really pivoted were internships. Mm-hmm. Right. And so those folks did an amazing job convincing employers and students and their families that those were valuable. But I heard over and over again, like, well, this is going to be the end of study abroad because now students can just do all this stuff virtually. And we know now that's not the case, right? I think we're all still learning how hybrid and virtual programs can augment mobility and really extend the learning, but it's not a replacement. And I was saying that back then. I was like, I know that students understand they need the knowledge and the skills and the relationships that come from meeting people in person and understanding other communities. And I think demand is now back and shows that that's true. But it was remarkable how many people reached out to me or how many articles I read saying that study abroad is dead. So then, when the layoffs began, the terminations began, we immediately said anyone that has lost their job due to COVID-19 can have free individual membership in the forum. Mm. And that was one way that we kept people engaged in the field. They were able to attend our virtual conference at no charge. We actually even employed some of them during the virtual conference and beyond. So they became kind of this force of technical producers that worked with the people who, the session presenters. So they, we did training for them in Zoom and again, some of those folks continue to work with us to this day in that role.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to look at sort of a broader international education look now, because one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is, just I think international educators comfort level with the digital space. Zoom, I think, in every industry, has taken over, but I think us as professionals, we're just like, oh, we know how to interact. I mean, I never have phone meetings anymore. I always have Zoom meetings, almost exclusively. And I think a lot of people, that's true. And so, as a result, and all this technology being available to all types of organizations and institutions, now there's, you can find free online on demand trainings for our profession in lots of different avenues. And I'm curious, like, how that kind of, I know, egalitarian, if you will, like, availability of training and professional development has influenced your approach at the forum, or how you see your role. Because when and as I've been coming up in my field, I've always thought of, oh, if I want to learn health and safety, I'm going to do a workshop at NAFSA. If I want to learn, I did the quip training way back in the day when that was still a thing at the forum, many moons ago. And so I always thought that's where I go to learn how to do my job better or be a better professional. But now I feel like there's a lot of places we can get that outside of the professional orgs. And so I'm curious if that's changed at all for you, and you see your role differently, or you're approaching the training and professional development differently at all now.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely approaching it differently in that I think long before the pandemic, I realized, and the staff at the forum realized, that some of the things that we were doing were getting a little stale for people, or not that the content isn't absolutely critical and of the highest quality, but the format in which people want to learn today has changed. So if you look at things like LinkedIn Learning, where it's modular and it's online and go at your own pace, and do it at 3 o'clock in the morning if you want to.
Right.
That's a different modality, and a different pedagogy, perhaps. I think what really sets us apart, and so let me say, we are looking at that, right? So the forum did nothing virtually except we had done a few webinars. So none of our workshops, none of our institutes, certainly not a conference, had been done online. And so we have learned a lot about our own materials, what works, what doesn't work. The people who facilitate our workshops, of course, it's staff and a combination of experienced professionals in the field, like yourself. Some folks do much better in an online environment and are comfortable facilitating a workshop online or a session online. Some people are much better in person and prefer that. So I think what we offer is the continued high quality, the focus on the standards, right? And I would argue that, yes, other people can talk about health and safety, or any other topic. I picked that because you just mentioned that. But we have the standards of good practice, right? It's our responsibility, according to the US federal government, to develop those standards and to disseminate them. And so I think that we have an incredibly deep pool of facilitators and people that will jump on a webinar, jump into a workshop, and I think the level of quality is certainly something that sets us apart. How we deliver that is certainly changing. You may have seen an announcement recently that we're partnering with SIT to deliver our certification program in a new format, so that there's now graduate credit that can be attached to the forum's professional certification. And so we're looking at all of those things. How do we pair things? For example, one of our newest events is the Career Integrated Global Learning Conference. And we paired that with our European conference, so that if people are going to travel, they have more options and more rationale for both the carbon and the cost
Mm-hmm.
of traveling to an
Mm-hmm.
event.
Mm-hmm.
So it is something that we talk about every day, and we're looking at, and I think the online actually gives us the ability to have lower priced programs that are more equitable. People who don't have the budget or can't afford the time to travel can participate.
Mm-hmm.
But we're looking at everything.
Yeah. Well, so in my mind, I imagine that there's this like exclusive little WhatsApp group that's like you, the president of NAFSA, the founder of Diversity Abroad, IIE. Like you'll have this little club. There's like 12 of you in it, and you're like all talking about like, okay, what do we do now? And various things happening, throughout the last few years. What if that does exist? You don't have to disclose it one way or the other, but
It
if
doesn't.
you were in a room with your peers and specifically within that professional organization leadership kind of peer group,
Mhm.
what do you think your biggest concerns and challenges you all would talk about to each other? What do you think those would be?
I think the biggest concern is how do we collectively serve members and not duplicate,
Mm,
right?
mm, yeah.
I have made a very conscious effort with some success and not as much success as I might like, depending on the organization. But I spend a lot of time and energy trying to collaborate with other associations. And a great example of that is our advocacy around Spanish visas and
Mm,
trying to work with the Spanish government to address the visa shortage and the time lag for students trying to obtain visas for Spain. NAFSA, APUNE, and the Forum have been now working on this for close to a year. And, we co-developed letters, we attended a meeting at the embassy, we're regularly reaching out together.
mhm,
We share the same messages with our members. So, I was on a panel recently with Lily Lopez McGee from Diversity Abroad.
mhm,
I think there are opportunities for us to reinforce what each
mhm,
other is doing.
mhm.
I wish that WhatsApp group actually existed. It's a great idea. Maybe I'll start one and suggest it.
Well, tell them I said hello if you do that. Yes.
I will. I will. But I think making sure that we have enough differentiation and enough of a return on investment, because everybody's budget is tight and nobody can afford to belong to multiple associations that
Right.
don't provide them with some other benefit.
Mhm,
I will say one of the things that I was told repeatedly by members over the past couple years is that because the forum has an institutional membership model,
mhm.
and one membership fee means that their entire faculty and staff can benefit from the resources. That is a differentiator for us.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
I would agree. And I have to just echo, I think when I think, nowadays I came from, working in an international ed office, running an international office at a community college. And I think if I think of like the NAFSA forum sort of organizations, I think about the advocacy component, especially now of sort of you all having the ear and the attention of the people who are making decisions about the resources and the access. And I think the Spanish visa one is an excellent example of, I as a professional would look to you all to be our frontline advocates, because the rest of us, I know you're busy too, but that being a key element of the service you provide, because I don't have time to try to call the embassy, all the time or what have you, to sort of get our issues heard, at least addressed. And so I think that advocacy component is a differentiator as well, for sure.
and there's so much there's so much going on in the world, and
Hmm.
higher education is under so much pressure on many different fronts
Hmm.
that our we have a very small niche. We are focused on education abroad. We're not working in enrollment management of international students, or visa problems for international students coming into the US, which also is a huge headache for many of my peers. We are only focused on education abroad. And so I think that has been a really important, knowing that there is someone here that is thinking about that day and night all the time, really has made a difference for our members, particularly during the pandemic.
We only have a few minutes left. So again, thank you so much for being here and having this great conversation. I hope our listeners have gotten a lot out of this and learned a lot about the forum, but also you and some interesting perspectives that you bring to the field. The last thing I kind of wanted to talk about with you is, we think about professional organizations and, helping us evolve as professionals and everything we've already discussed. But as international education was not immune to the Great Resignation. It started with a push out, because of layoffs, as you mentioned before, and then people just not coming back as a result of those layoffs, and other people saying, this isn't for me, and I'm exiting higher ed, or specifically international ed. What do you think the role of professional organizations is in helping attract top talent back or into our field, our professional field, because it is professionalized, especially with things like the standards that the forum has developed?
Absolutely. It's absolutely professionalized. And I think from a human perspective, let me speak first to those folks who have been in the trenches since spring of 2020. We really can't overlook the fact that we've all been through personal and professional trauma on so many levels. And those same people who worked 24/7 to bring students home are now the same folks who are under enormous pressure to rev things back up, often with fewer resources or less experienced staff. So, I have to say that it's starting to feel like there's finally light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not the next train, thankfully. I'm very optimistic about the field's recovery, but restarting the education abroad engine is not without complications, and in many ways is proven to be more challenging than shutting it down. It's a much better problem to have, in my opinion, but it's still stressful for the people who have been in this for the long haul. One of the things I am most excited about is welcoming new people into the field. And, it gives us an opportunity to develop new relationships, to look back at some of the things we've taken for granted. For example, we've just started a new Education Abroad 101 webinar series for people who are new to the field, giving them that time and space and some guidance on resources. I think it's important that we continue to develop and nurture that supportive network that is really the hallmark of education abroad. And we have a duty to provide mentoring opportunities and to continue building the next generation of leaders. So a lot of the folks who are left standing after the pandemic, I think, are at that mid-career level, and they've been remarkably overlooked for a long time. I was really fortunate to work with a group of mid-career professionals in a forum working group over a year ago now. And the passion and the enthusiasm that they have, it was amazing. It was amazing to watch. It was amazing to see the resources that they created in a short period of time, and how that group continues to do other things, to collaborate, to work together. And I think as a professional organization, part of our responsibility is to not look at just the director of the Ed Abroad office or the vice president at the Ed Abroad organization. It's to make sure that we're supporting people throughout their entire career, and to demonstrate that there is a career path for people. And I think that's new, right? And there's a real opportunity right now.
Yeah. And, my company, Inside Study Abroad, has always been focused on those emerging professionals, and sort of filling that gap between, like, I'm interested in a career, but I'm not in it yet. And how do I explore this? How do I get experience? How do I learn what these jobs even are? And so there's always been that sort of hunger for our field. One of the things I have seen over the last several years, the commentary around, and this is probably higher ed in general, but specific to international ed, this commentary that we're all overeducated and underpaid. And so I'm curious if you all have had conversations about whether it's advocacy or standards around um, education requirements and or pay grade levels that you think we should kind of standardize in a way of like, hey, if you're going to ask people to go invest in
Mhm.
a master's degree, which is most of the time, then they should be compensated accordingly to be able to, one, pay off that debt, and two, to bring to the table that education and expertise level that they're bringing, as well. And I feel like there's always been a disconnect between education requirement and compensation in higher ed.
I think that's absolutely right. And this group that I was just talking about, the Mid-Career Professionals Working Group, actually created a rubric for skills and experiences that people in our field should have. Well, first they created a definition of what is
Hmm.
a mid-career professional.
Hmm.
Then they created a rubric around skills and experiences, and part of the reason to do that, and it's available for free on the forum's website. So if you go to our search on the website forumea.org for mid-career professionals, it's one of the resources that they created, and the reason they created it was to be able to help people making arguments for a raise or a promotion.
Hmm.
The salary is a more challenging
Oh yeah.
thing to address, right? Because it's very hard to do comparisons of salary across different institution and organizational types.
Hmm.
But we are about to launch the next State of the Field survey,
Mm.
and that will include some questions that were originally part of the Pathways to the Profession research that we did years ago, trying to provide updated information about salaries, titles,
Hmm.
and where we are as a field right now.
Hmm. Oh, I
So
can't wait. I can't wait to see that. And I'm definitely going to go look at that mid-career information you just talked about too, because I'd love to see that rubric. So thank you for sharing that. So we're last question. You got just a couple minutes left here. So if you could highlight one project or one initiative or something you're super excited about that you're working on for the forum over the next 12 months, what's the one thing? Because I know you have a lot going on, but what's the one thing that you would want people to know that you're super excited to launch in the future or expand on? What's one thing we can all look to coming up?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is our new book series. I'd love to have two things that I'm excited about if I'm allowed.
Okay, I'll give you
But I'll speak very quickly. So we have 4 books that are about to be published. They're all based on the standards and showing the standards in action, and they're led by scholar practitioners in our field who are talking about topics such as diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, and decolonizing education abroad.
two.
And so I think there's super hot topics, and there's a lot of really wonderful thought pieces.
Okay.
If I'm allowed a second thing that I'm excited about, it really is the Career Integrated Global Learning Conference. And for me, the reason why that's so exciting is because we're really taking an expansive view of workforce development.
Hmm.
And this conference is bringing in the perspective of employers and career services folks. And I should say that again, employers and career services, and modalities ranging from co-ops to consulting projects, both in-person and virtual internships.
Hmm.
So I don't think there's another conference out there, past or present, that is taking such a wide view on career development and the role of global learning in
Mhm.
workforce development.
Yeah, that is very exciting. I'm very good friends with Kate Moore, who I know has been working on
Oh, yes.
that initiative. So I know she's very excited about it. So I'll be interested to see what comes out of this event. So I would echo that one as something I'm excited about the forum's doing. And I didn't
Thank
know
you.
about the books, so this is news to me. So you heard it here first, everybody. Breaking news. Melissa, thank you again so much for having this conversation. Where, if people want to connect with you, where would you like them to come find you online?
So you can find me online at LinkedIn. We also have the Forum on Education Abroad LinkedIn group, and they're welcome to contact me by email. My email is toriesme@forumea.org. And thank you so much for inviting me today, Brooke. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope it's been a valuable conversation for your audience.
Yeah, thank you. It absolutely has been. It's been valuable for me. And so, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the Gateway Spotlight series. We're going to have many more interesting conversations with interesting people in our field coming soon. So, stay tuned for that. And until next time, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thanks, y'all.